We will start that's the first session, the opening session of the OBPS Workshop number 7 for the week. And basically, it's about ocean best practices. That's the text we have come up in the beginning with for providing some common solutions to the 10 selected challenges set by the UN Ocean Decade for collective impact. So from the side of the organizers, myself and Georges Petihakis, Georges is from the Institute of Oceanography in Heraklion in Crete, and are presenting. And I really would like to thank a lot Cora, and who is now with MIO in Marseille, and Pauline, working for us at IODE, UNESCO, for really overseeing all the sessions, not only for this year, but for this week, but for next week as well, for the focus session we talked a bit about. And José, I mean, without José, we would not have all of that in place. I mean, thanks, José, dispatching, I don't know, 25 or so different Zoom links and so on. And José from the Air Center in Azores, Portugal. And Jay Perlman from also from IEEE for helping in the background and connecting to many people. So the next slide. I recall here the 10 challenges, and that's really what we are going to focus on. That was the main idea in the beginning when we started to elaborating this workshop, and we had the idea of saying, okay, this is the decade we are in. This decade, it started probably a third of it passed. And what can we do about the challenges, and what the challenges have to develop, and what we have to develop in terms of best practices to have some kind of impact, let's say, even small, onto the challenges. So as I said just before, this is a workshop this week, 9 to 13 of October, and next week we have focus session on different challenges, and it will be more really directed to the challenges themselves. Okay, today we will have five presenters, and the same except Vladimir, who could not attend and is going to provide a video. We'll have then Vladimir Ryabinin from the Executive Secretary from IOC, Peter Pissierssens, the head of the IOC project for IODE, and the presentation, the title is in. Joana, she said that we presented at the head of Ocean Observation and Services at IOC and director of GOOS. She will present the best practices and GOOS. Audrey, head of the EU Office for GEO Blue Planet, implemented by Mercator Ocean International, Mercator being in Toulouse in France. And I had no time to put the title, sorry, Audrey. And Edem Mahu, who I hope she's able to connect, and she's a scientist, senior lecturer and a marine biochemistry lady at University of Ghana, and we will have more when Craig will introduce the panel. So I won't be too long. Then one more slide. The panel session, the moderator will be Craig McLean. I just put former director of NOAA research, Craig. That's what I came up with. He's like me, that is retired. And so on the left side of the screen, you can see things that we brainstormed about what kind of question could we ask to everyone. So this is our side. Craig has his own view, of course, and might or not be interested or use what we wrote. But basically the best practices and beyond best practices. Do we have gaps? Do we have? Should they be addressed and developed for all the topics, etc.? And from my side, which is IEEE, I have added from best practices to standards, which is something that IEEE is deeply involved in, and which normally brings trust, interoperability, and inclusiveness. So, thank you. And Jose, if you can, okay, I stopped my sharing. Okay, and before Jose starts the, hi Edem, so nice to see you. I was looking at my slides, I didn't see you. Before Jose starts Vladimir video, I would like to say that according to the latest registration Excel file, we have something like almost 400 registered people, not all of them connected today, but 400, and coming from something like 80 countries, which is about half the countries of the world. So we are very pleased. And hopefully today we can reach maybe 200 people looking at, except the one who are either at night or in the morning very early, which about the same time. Okay, Jose, you can go. Thank you.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, on the request of the organizers of this workshop, I have the pleasure of briefly speaking to you, presenting the IOC, Environmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO, the home of ocean sciences in the United Nations system, the Ocean Decade, and basically why it is all needed and why this work actually sets the requirements for creating best practices. You know, first of all, about IOC. IOC is a part of UNESCO. It was established in 1960, and at the time we had only 40 member states. And during that time, the organization was mostly needed to provide platform for communication between different, I would say, political systems. And the oceanographers needed to talk. They didn't have any platform. So that was the role of IOC. But the world has changed. And you see on the slide a lot of exponential graphs showing how changed the population, the production, the pollution. And because of that, ocean is critically important for survival of our humankind. And science is also critically important. And because of that, IOC is slowly but very surely turning into a UN platform for enabling ocean science solutions for solving existential issues. And now we have 150 member states. Our medium-term strategy for the years 2022-2029 basically is that we would like to bridge together the science community and the governments on the road to the ocean need for the future we want, focusing on the health of the ocean, on warning systems in relation to the ocean, including tsunamis, focusing on climate change, mitigation of it, developing sustainable ocean economy. The word sustainable is here, very, very important. And also being able to see what is on the horizon in terms of constantly emerging new issues in the ocean. So this is the current portfolio of IOC. IOC is working through its functions from ocean research to observations, data, real-time services, assessments, information for policy, management of the policy, governance of the ocean, and enabling that combination of functions through the capacity development. You also see the acronyms, which despite I hate acronyms, this is the only way to present for you on one slide the huge portfolio of IOC work, and each of these acronyms like Global Ocean Observing System, excuse me, like IODE, like Ocean Biodiversity Information System, is a very big undertaking. So that's the current IOC. And I'd like to say that our goal, of course, is the same goal as for the whole world. In 2015, the whole world, through the United Nations General Assembly, agreed to move forward on sustainable development with its 17 sustainable development goals, including goal 14 on the ocean. And during that assembly, there was actually a presentation of the first World Ocean Assessment, which is officially called the first Global Marine Integrated Marine Assessment. And this is a 1,000-page document. It was subsequently published in 2016. And if I summarize this 1,000 pages in one phrase, it would be: humankind is running out of time to start managing the ocean sustainably. And indeed, sustainable development depends on the ocean. And it also is ocean science intensive. People did not realize that connection, actually. So, you know, this SDG 14 is made of 10 targets. IOC is helping United Nations Environment Program to develop indicators on pollution, on protection and restoring of marine ecosystems. We are a custodian agency for reporting to the world on what is happening with ocean acidification, also on the current capacity of ocean science. You know, so coming back to that conclusion that humankind is running out of time to start managing the ocean sustainably. So that actually statement is should be detailed, and we have different ways of working in the ocean. Coastal zone management adaptation is the oldest activity. Now we are moving offshore. Developing sustainable ocean economy and maritime special planning is the way forward for finding harmony and or coexistence between different users of the ocean, like fisheries, tourism, transport, ports, harbors, dredging, naval operations, underwater cultural heritage, protection of environment, and many things like this. So this is a way for us to develop ocean economy in a sustainable way. Then we need to protect the ocean, conserve biodiversity beyond also areas of national jurisdiction. We can do this through management of large marine ecosystems. We need to manage fisheries, aquaculture, adaptation, mitigation of climate change, as 25% of carbon emissions may be cut through ocean solutions. This is a big area determining feasibility of the Paris Agreement in relation to the ocean. We need to develop strategies of policies of using the ocean, real-time services, and you know we need to develop also capacity and develop early warning systems. So this is probably not a complete set of management practices in relation to the ocean. But what is really important is that nowhere except probably climate we have an agreement, official agreement, legally binding. Now we have the legally binding agreement on biodiversity beyond areas of national jurisdiction. But all of that is actually a means of creating best practices in maritime special planning, in coastal zone management, and many other areas. So best practices are actually universal in our world. And the reason for that is basically the fact that we don't have a convention on ocean science and convention on that science is critically important. Like in WMO, there is a convention. There are meteorological observations. They have to be conducted on using certain standards. So this in the work in oceanography is basically focused on goodwill, and this is exactly why we need best practices. So how we move forward on this? For us, the most important vehicle right now is the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. So when I came to IOC in 2015, there was a sense of desperation that we basically needed to find for us an accelerator of all that we do. We also realized that the new agenda, new at the time of sustainable development, requires support, requires ocean science. So these ideas came together, but we also realized that for example, the International Polar Year 2007-2008 was too short to achieve certain results, and we needed a decade. So this all was formulated in the proposal to United Nations, and United Nations adopted the decision to proclaim the decade in 2021. So how this was actually sold to United Nations is that, you know, all this framework that exists in the ocean really require science to be implemented. You know, I have to say that for me, the situation with the ocean is quite medical, in the sense that ocean is sick. It has several diseases. Diseases are treated by several doctors. All of these doctors are quite good, but the only problem is that they're treating their diseases and not speaking to each other. We need to cure the patient. This requires a consolidated approach that is based on ocean science, and that is for me the key motivation for the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. So in 2017, the decade was proclaimed 3 years in advance by the United Nations General Assembly, and we started to move forward. We have been able to develop a plan, not only by IOC, but the important thing is that the plan was developed by, in co-design mode, by many, many stakeholders. That's exactly why the decade is now so successful. So we coined the vision of the ocean that we would like to see by the year 2030. And the ocean is clean, healthy, resilient, productive, predicted, safe, accessible. But you know, someone suggested to us that we need actually the ocean that is inspiring and engaging. That was a game changer in our planning. So so this is what we would like to achieve, but this has to be realized through technical work. And the technical work should be focused on key areas of development in the ocean, and these areas would be pollution of the ocean, health of ecosystems, management of ecosystems, generating food from the ocean for the growing population, moving forward on ocean economy, making it sustainable and growing, ocean climate nexus, risks associated with the ocean and related warning systems, observing the ocean, creating prediction of the ocean, digital representation of the ocean, digital twin of the ocean, and development of capacity, leaving no one behind. And once again, we need to change our behavior, be inspired and engaged by the ocean. That is actually achieved by ocean literacy and some other ways. So that is the scope of the Ocean Decade. And I have to say that we also created a process. In this process, we analyze the gaps. With that, we see what is missing, what is weak, what is moving forward faster. And with that, we will issue different calls, and we're moving forward on planned, coordinated as much as possible, because we didn't get any penny to move the Ocean Decade forward from the United Nations system, but we got the blessing, we got the understanding that you guys are doing a very important job, so people will help you. And that is exactly what is happening now. So where we are in the decade right now. So because we don't have any dedicated funding, we started to issue calls for actions. The fifth call was completed on 31st of August. This year, we are analyzing the results, and already we have 48 decade programs, 276 projects. If in 2016 we were just designing the ideas about the decade, it was just us, few people, few enthusiasts. Now we have more than 35,000 people, individuals working for the decade in one way or another. We have more than 3,500 organizations working for the decade. So that is the current scale of the decade, which is the largest undertaking in ocean sciences ever. So it's not about the size, it's also about what is happening. So in terms of the decade challenges, we have been able to move forward very strongly on ocean observations. And I would like to say that best practices are very important there. Ocean climate also is benefiting from various best practices. So we also are quite, I would say, advanced in terms of ecosystem management in the ocean, and also in capacity development. There is less interest, unfortunately, in developing sustainable ocean economy, coastal resilience, despite we have very significant progress in tsunami, which is also based very much on standards and environmental standards. And coastal resilience is benefiting from a series of recognition of tsunami-ready status that is very much also following the notion of best practices, but is on the intergovernmental level. So this is how the decade is moving forward. So and then what is also important, this is not just only scientists. There is a basically an ecosystem of many types of stakeholders in the ocean decade. I say scientists, national local governments, philanthropic organizations, non-governmental organizations, industry, various investment, indigenous knowledge holders, local communities, United Nations, regional organizations, early career ocean professionals. More than 50% of people participating in the decade are women. So this ecosystem is working, and the main idea that is making it all work is the design. Co-design, the science we need for the ocean we want, is the cornerstone of our activities, and this is where the best practices are really coming in very, very strongly. So, so we are creating basically a public movement. In the absence of the convention, we're creating a movement of people who are enthusiastic about the ocean, who are very qualified, and who would like to work together towards creating the ocean we need for the future we want. So, this also moves forward with in many countries. We have now 37 national decade committees in different parts of the world. They're all different. You know, and actually I would like to say they also are exchanging their best practices. For example, in Canada, it's basically a community. In China, and not ordinary people working through kind of public movement ways. In China, this is obviously a more governmental system, and there are different kind of approaches in many countries. So this is the seeds. These are the seeds of the future governance of the ocean, because, you know, this is really sometimes governmental, sometimes public, all is based on science. So this is what is, I think, changing the world very successfully. And then these committees are also developing their best practices. So this is where we are. I would like to inform you that in April, from 10th to 12th, and also with meetings around those days, there will be a milestone event, the Decade Conference in Barcelona, and this will be a stock taking of where we are in the ocean science and also in the Decade of Ocean Science. And this conference will be big. It will be a major brainstorming. It will create for us, I think, really a milestone in developing approaches toward creating the ocean we need for the future. And then with that, we will move forward on the process that is already starting, which is called Vision 2030. That is an assessment of where we are, what we have achieved, what is missing in the pot. And this process will go through various conferences. For example, this Ocean Decade Conference in Barcelona. Then there will be a conference in Costa Rica that is preparatory conference for the Conference of United Nations on the Ocean in Nice. That will be preceded by One Ocean Science Conference. So I think we have been able to engage the governments, the communities at the previously unseen levels. This is where the ocean science is moving forward. So, you know, I presented to you the World Assessment #1, World Ocean Assessment #1, with that conclusion that humankind is running out of time to start managing the ocean sustainably. So I would like to say that IOC is running the decade with a lot of friends and colleagues in a very open way. And the decade has started to create a major positive change in the ocean science that is based on co-design, on the use of best practices, focusing on science, technology, economy, ethics, bringing people, bringing governments. So for us, the best practices in many ways is a way of implementing the co-design approach. And I hope very much that with this approach, with people who are engaged, we will be changing the way how we operate in the ocean. And also, I have to say also that people that are participating in the decade are excellent people. Ocean brings together great people. And so we are, I think, also changing the mindsets of people in the current quite difficult times. So this is how the IOC works, the decade works, and best practices. That the topic of this workshop is a key instrument for us. With that, I wish you a very successful workshop and develop best practices, please, in the best possible way. All the best, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh, thank you, Vladimir. If you cannot hear us, There are some questions, not questions, but comments in the list, and one question in the Q&A, and we will try to address that later. Now we have a presentation by Peter. It's an IOD perspective on the OBPS, and I will share the screen, and Peter will tell me when to change the slide.
Sure.
So this time I try to not make a mistake. And yeah, it works. Okay,
Yes,
the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. So as René said, I will try to give the IOD perspective on the OBPS, the Ocean Best Practices System. Next slide. Next slide, René. Yeah. Oops, it went too fast. One before. Yeah, okay. So let's first of all rewind a little bit to 2019, when the IOC, in fact, established the OBPS. And what it says was the objectives of the OBPS project are to increase efficiency, reproducibility, and interoperability of the entire ocean observing value chain by providing the community with a unified, sustained, and readily accessible knowledge base of interdisciplinary best practices. And that should then lead to a global access to these best practices in ocean observing. Next slide. Yeah. So before anything else, we had to define what do we use as a working definition for a best practice. And this is the definition we use. A best practice is a methodology that has repeatedly produced superior results relative to other methodologies with the same objective. And to be fully elevated to a best practice, a promising method will have been adopted and employed by multiple organizations. Those are the definitions we've been using since 2019. Next slide. Yeah. Now, how do best practices fit within IOD? IOD being one of the two, let's say, parent programs of the OBPS together with GOOS. Now, if you look at the main objectives of the IOD program, I mean, IOD was established in 1961, and there were some revisions to the terms of reference. And here you see the one in 2013. And you see a reference in number 1, facilitate and promote the discovery, exchange of, and access to marine data and information, blah, 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 through the use of international standards. And on the 3rd, you see to develop or use existing best practices for the discovery, management, exchange of, and access to marine data information. So in the, let's say, the founding principles of IOD, you see the references to standards and best practices. Next slide, please. Now, IOD, in its long history, has published quite a few manuals and guides. You can see here we have 75 of those. But within the framework of OBPS, we may need to check if these are all can they be considered as best practices, because these have been agreed upon, let's say, by the IOD community. But we also have a number of associated programs. I mean, in the European context, I could mention CDataNet, EMODNet. There are some others as well in various member states. And we may need to check, okay, the ones that we have agreed upon within IOC, IOD, are they the best practices, or are some of these others more appropriate as best practices? So that's something we'll need to investigate. Next slide. Yeah. Now, an activity we also may want to have a closer look at is ODIS, the Ocean Data and Information System. And what does that want to do? It wants to build a sustainable, interoperable, and inclusive digital ecosystem for all ocean stakeholders. And that is, for example, directly relevant to Challenge 8 of the decade. So it means improving the discovery and interoperability of existing systems, improve access to global ocean information, data, and knowledge, link and anchor a network of regional and thematic nodes, provide capacity building to support contributors and end users, and connect independent digital initiatives. But we can argue that also methods are data and information. So they would also fit within this concept of a federated global digital ecosystem. Next slide, please. And if we look at where are we with this data and information system, well, the Ocean Info Hub, which is a practical application of this, we already have this central hub, the global hub, with quite a number of content items. And we focused initially our efforts on 3 regions, Latin America and the Caribbean, Africa, and Pacific small island developing states. We currently have 38 nodes that are already connected into this ecosystem, and quite a few more are being prepared to also be connected. And for example, also the IOC's, the IODE's National Oceanographic Data Center and associate data units will gradually now start connecting into this system. Next slide, please. So what's behind this concept and what is the scalability? Well, the way we see it is you will have an oceans ecosystem, that's ODES. You will have, for example, an atmosphere ecosystem, which is being developed by WMO through its WIS 2. You could think of, for example, ecosystem dealing with city information, terrestrial and whatnot. And that can then lead to a biosphere that then, for example, gives answers related to resilient food systems, ocean literacy, mariculture, healthy oceans, and whatnot. So again, linking to these challenges of the decade. Next slide, please. Now, what we will need to do when we build these ecosystems is we need to have trust in the data and information that is made available through these ecosystems. So first of all, we need assurance of the quality of the observations, which means, first of all, we need high quality provenance metadata. And where did the data come from? How were the observations measured with what? What quality information can we have? Secondly, need fully transparent and accessible quality control methods, and what methods have been used to check the quality of the observations. We need seamlessly interoperable vocabularies and ontologies, and we need an agreement on interoperability arrangements and technology so the systems can talk to each other. Next slide, please. Now, how do we agree on a best practice? Well, a best practice needs convincingly and repeatedly shown to produce superior results relevant to other methods. But we need evidence in addition to expert opinion. It's not sufficient for 10 experts to say, well, this is a best practice. There has to be some evidence. And so to be fully elevated to a best practice, a promising method will have been reviewed, adopted, and employed by multiple organizations. And that came back from the initial definition. Next slide, please. In the framework of the decade, we are applying a multidisciplinary approach with multiple communities of practice. And the federation of these communities and their data will allow them to identify their best practices. Next slide, please. So each community related, for example, to a challenge can identify and provide evidence for what it claims are its best practices using the expertise within that community. And each community will agree on subject categories, dictionaries, and ontologies that are used and applicable to that particular challenge. But in addition to these community-based practices and methods, we will need to have some common agreements. The first one on rules to elevate a practice to a best practices, what tests should be taken. Secondly, the coordination hub will allow the searching across all discipline nodes, similar to what I've shown you for the Ocean Info Hub. And then last, the coordination hub will also support all communities in linking to ODES and also the the decade implementation of ODIS, which is the Ocean Data 2030, where we're trying to bring together these multiple communities to answer questions that are relevant to all these communities. Next slide, please.
That's what I have.
That is it. Yeah, I stopped my 10 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Peter. I am okay, moving to Joana. So do you want me to display your slides? I can do it, I hope.
Yes, please. That'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, let me just 2 seconds to find out the right screen, wherever it is.
I can do it as well.
No, it's coming. It's coming. Okay, and this is your screen. Oops. Now I have to go back there.
I can't get Parliament free too much.
It started.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. Welcome to you all online. I am Dr. Joana Post. I am the GOOS Office Director. GOOS stands for the Global Ocean Observing System. And this is really, if Peter was talking about the data has to come from somewhere. And a lot of that comes from the observations and the equipment that's in place or moving through or flying across our ocean, or indeed around our blue planet in satellite. Next slide, please. So GOOS has a strategy where it envisages a global ocean observing system that delivers all of the essential information for our sustainable development, safety, well-being, and prosperity. We have 11 actions within that context with 3 major aims: to deepen engagement and impact around delivering that information, to integrate, and Peter talked a lot about that in terms of data integration. We need systematic integration to deliver that data also. And of course, we're building for the future. We're building for the future very much to respond to the needs on an intergovernmental level that are driving our conversations around climate, sustainable development, and biodiversity protection. Next slide, please. So GOOS today looks a little bit like this. I always think this is a slight misrepresentation because the dots are a lot smaller and the ocean's a lot bigger. But this is this hopefully gives you the context of how much information is being measured through a range of different networks. And the ocean works differently to the land. On the land, we have meteorological, hydrological services, Met offices in your countries, if you like, taking measurements of the atmosphere through different ways, taking measurements also of the hydrology through different ways. The ocean is another part of this conversation, a very important part of our global systems. And GOOS is operated through 84 countries. There's 8,700 platforms with different networks. So Argo, there's a range of Argo floats around the ocean that start on the surface as dive down into the ocean. There's buoys, there's radar, there's gliders, and there's also a number of emerging networks such as deep sea cables. And the ones that I like best are the animals diving through the Southern Ocean, making the measurements there. But it gives you what I think is really an interesting topic is how difficult it is to measure what's happening in the ocean, a lot more difficult than on land. And this has caused a lot of challenges with the global ocean observing system. But what we're aiming for here at GOOS is a truly unified ocean observing system that delivers to the UN, delivers to countries the information they need to deliver to industry and to deliver to science. And a lot of currently what's happened is that there's a lot of science-driven ocean observations, but a real need to deliver the understanding along the value chain from observation to data to policy and decision-making, the value of ocean observations within this space. Next slide, please. So GOOS is at the heart of the ocean decade. You can't manage what you don't measure. So it really is an important part of the decade. And although it is an item on the list of decade actions, I do believe it's a cross-cutting issue. It's the foundation of the decision-making that we make in terms of renewable, sustainable, climate resilient planning within our ocean and also within the land, when you think about the ocean as a driver of our weather systems and of our extreme events, which are, of course, getting much more challenging in the face of climate change. Next slide, please. So we have these are the focus areas for GOOS, and it reflects very much on what Peter was saying in terms of these different data ecosystems that have to deliver into these different spaces. So you need the observations, and then you sort of feed back into that. So we know that we need to make decisions about adaptation. We need to understand the global carbon cycles in order that mitigation action is much more pushed much more strongly. To understand some of the conversations that are going to be very difficult when it comes to carbon dioxide removal moving forward. I think everyone online has seen a weather forecast or checked their cell phone today. This information comes from the ocean. And this is an extremely important part of your everyday life, everybody's everyday life. And then, of course, the protection of that and the need through such recent activities under the UN, such as early warning systems for all initiative and understanding everything from tsunami to typhoons. And the ocean health, which is suffering very strongly from human activities, to be able to better understand what's happening in terms of biodiversity, in terms of ocean acidification, in terms of changes in salinity, in currents, in oxygenation within the ocean. Next slide, please. So this brings me to best practices, which is why we're chatting today. So GOOS has an endorsed best practices. So the best practices in the ocean observation context is, of course, more technical in terms of how, what are the best ways to measure certain aspects of the observation system. GOOS has globally recognized best practices that have undergone a rigorous process of community review. And it actually encourages the communities to develop best practices across the life cycle of ocean observation. Next slide, please, René. So to be a GOOS endorsed best practice, it's not easy. It's a very lengthy but very important process. It's rigorous. It's originated from a network. There's approved leadership of the relevant network. It's recognized through relevant what we have are sort of certain decision-making bodies under GOOS, such as panels around different essential ocean variables, or a panel looking at ocean observations and forecasting. So there are bodies within the GOOS family that are involved in recognizing these best practices. And all of them are on the repository, which is available online. And I double checked this morning, we have 9 GOOS endorsed best practices for the GOOS infrastructure, with one coming online very soon, which is the Argo floats. But it gives the validity of really the best way of doing things as far as our measuring our ocean is concerned. Next slide, please. So I think it's important to come back now to the Ocean Decade challenges. This is the same 10 challenges that you've all seen perhaps many times, and Peter had his slides. So he referred to the 8th one, the ocean digital representation. I'm going to refer to the 7th one, the ocean observing system. But it really is, I do emphasize this value chain of information from the observations that provides the data flow needed to build into what Peter was referring to as this federated system with endorsed best practices, which then ultimately, and this is why we're here, to serve different communities of practice that serve societal needs across the 3 focus areas: climate, forecasting, and health. And I think I do encourage to think about this sort of value chain of information, because at the end of the day, we need to serve the decision makers and respond to their needs moving forward and build into that concept, so that the value chain of information reinforces the value of investing in observations and in these data ecosystems, which are the basis from which good decision making can take place within this context. Next slide. And that's it. And thank you very much. And I pass the floor back to René.
Thanks a lot, Joana. I'm going to stop the sharing and let Audrey display her own PPT, because I had no time to check if you sent it to me.
I did not. Let me share my screen. Can you just let me know if this works on your side?
Fantastic, yeah.
Perfect. Well, first of all, I want to thank René and Craig for inviting me today. It is my honor to have such amazing introduction to my talk from Vladimir and Joana and Peter, because you will see that, this is not the first slide, sorry.
What is your name?
Here we go. Well, I didn't put my name because so anyways, my name is Audrey. I am based at Mercator Océan, and I'm heading the European office for GEO Blue Planet. You might not have heard of GEO Blue Planet, but we're a group that aims to support the use and development of Earth observation for the benefit of society. I will not give a talk today on GEO Blue Planet, but on one activity that we are supporting, which is IMDOS. IMDOS is the Integrated Marine Debris Observing System. And I think the idea of this presentation was really to give you an example of a group working towards ocean best practices that answers the many ocean decade challenges. So before I start, I need to say that this group of IMDOS, the Integrated Marine Debris Observing System, is really a work of many different groups, including GOOS that was just presented before, the UN Environment Program, UNEP, the Global Partnership on Marine Litter, EU Ocean Up, which is the European project that funds my position, and as well the IOCCP and EuroC. I co-lead the secretariat of IMDOS with Arthur Platz from IOPAN. Anyway, so now the vision of IMDOS. We aim to have a globally coordinated and sustained observing system of marine debris, addressing the knowledge gaps and diverse stakeholder needs with adequate data and information. We are looking at answering 2 main UN decade challenges with providing this marine debris observing system. One is to understand and beat marine pollution, because we are talking about marine debris, which is 80% of which is plastic. And this number 7, which is expand the global ocean observing system. But I had a deeper look at the challenges. And in the end, what I noticed is that IMDOS does answer all the challenges indirectly of the decade, because we're looking at providing guidelines for data to study the impact of marine debris on biota, for provide information for risk assessment, provide solutions, for support for the development of innovative solutions, for the development of the innovations themselves to both observe marine debris, but also mitigate and so on. We're looking at supporting pollution warning system. We're looking at providing data for platforms such as the GPML, the Global Partnership on Marine Litter digital platform, but also digital twins of the ocean, and so on and so on. So you will see through my presentation that basically we are indirectly answering all of these challenges, because when René asked me what challenges, I had to look at them, and that's my conclusion, René, all of them.
Okay.
So our mission is to provide a coordination guidance to lead the marine debris community in establishing a sustained global observing system. We do not aim to create this data or even provide this data. We're aiming to provide coordination guidance in order to have a globally coordinated and sustained observing system, to have interoperable observation, to address knowledge gaps, to provide guidance for standardized data and harmonized monitoring. So this is where that bluish box, this is where we sit, right? We have societal needs for information that leads to observation requirements. And then this is us, with the observing element trying to integrate all of them through compatibility and complementarity to provide guidance for data harmonization, for sustained observation, for the increase of readiness, technical readiness level of innovating tools, and all this coordination and guidance then feeds the federated and operable data management systems that themselves feed both research but also database information for decision making. We have strategic objectives that revolve around three main points, which is providing engagement and coordination, providing system integration and delivery, and providing guidance. The idea is that IMDOS provide coordinate activities to gradually increase the readiness level of the global observing system and associated data management systems, aiming for operational capacity by 2030. But since today's and the following 2 weeks is about ocean best practices, I wanted to highlight the 4 objectives that are completely in line with the ocean best practices. The first one is to provide recommendation for the design and evolution of the marine debris observing system. The second one is to give guidance on the assessment and harmonization of the monitoring methodologies, and to provide guidance for harmonization, standardization, and quality control of marine debris data towards a federated and interoperable data management system, but also to ensure that the data is available through the FAIR principles of findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reuse. The early implementation of IMDOS, it all started in 2019 with the Ocean Ops conference in Honolulu through the impulse of Nikolai Maximenko. And since then, we've worked to make sure that IMDOS is co-designed. So we've had a vast number of interventions, but also events that we have organized. The next step is Vladimir mentioned the Barcelona event in 2024. And so IMDOS is inspired by a collective vision of marine debris, of the marine debris scientific community. We don't want to start from scratch. We are not starting from scratch. We are federating people providing this data and this knowledge. It is guided by an international interim scientific committee. And we build upon existing partnership and joint scientific initiatives that are established around marine litter monitoring on global level by IOC-UNESCO, by UNEP, by the G7, G20 countries, and so on. So as a coordinating body, IMDOS will bring different initiatives together, targeting marine debris monitoring, data standardization and harmonization, remote sensing and modeling. I will go over this really fast, but basically our approach is the integration and synthesis. And this approach ensures interoperable management activities for open and fair access to marine debris data marine debris data that is accessible to stakeholders, because we don't want only to have this data accessible for the scientific community, but we want to reach beyond this. I have to note that IMDOS is an endorsed GOOS project, and we will promote the potential of the existing monitoring programs that are coordinated by GOOS, of ship-based, fixed point, autonomous, and other platforms that are measuring marine debris right now in the open, coastal, and deep ocean. This is my last slide. I just want to say that IMDOS, as right now, as I was saying, an interim steering committee was established just last year, and we will be moving to a final steering committee in the future, comprising experts representing the different observing approaches, data management, but also geographic balance and so on. We are a partner of Ocean Bridges, which is a task force of the Early Career Ocean Professionals UN Decade program, to make sure that early career are represented in our observing system. And also, right now, the early stage of this coordination is supported by research funded from EuroC that just ended, but also from EU for Ocean Ops, which is my project. And we're looking at transition from short-term to long-term to ensure the sustainability of IMDOS. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Audrey. Very nice slides. If you can,
yeah, we'll stop
your sharing, and I'll ask Edem to upload our presentation and let us know what you're going to talk about. I think you're muted, Edem.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Yeah, so I have a good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone. My name is Edem Mahu, and I'm a scientist, a marine biogeochemist at the University of Ghana, and also I am co-chairing the Vision 2030 process together with Professor Brian Arbeck on Ocean Decade Challenge 9, which seeks to address the challenge on technology, knowledge, and skills in ocean in the ocean science community. So René asked me to share some thoughts from Africa about ocean best practices system. So I put my thoughts on one slide to share. First of all, how important is the ocean best practices system to us scientists globally, but also to us scientists in Africa or in developing countries. The ocean best practice system directly fits into addressing the ocean decade challenges, the 10 challenges that the previous speakers have already taken us through. And it can significantly contribute to bridging the knowledge and capacity gaps that exist in the global ocean science community if we all adopt this system. And for the challenge that I sit on together with Professor Brian, which is on skills, knowledge, and technology for all, we have identified through other working group members that there are and inequities in resource, knowledge, skills, and technology distribution within the ocean science community. And this is where a system like the Ocean Best Practices system can actually help in bridging some of these inequities that we have identified. The system actually provides that search engine for standardized data, protocol, and methodologies. And so if we are looking at things like inequities in knowledge, it means that to some extent, this system, if we are able to utilize it very well, we can bridge some of these challenges. And also when it comes to standard operating procedures, methodologies, which sometimes become a constraint for those of us from developing countries. If we are able to utilize the system, then we can be exposed to some of these methodologies. One key example is the methodologies that are there on for microplastic research. For example, if you go into the system, you realize that there are quite a number of standardized methods that are there now that we can use, which can help make our data comparable and make it more effective for use by other people. But this is a system and we all need to adopt it. How can we do that as Africans? We need to promote its use among ourselves. So I am happy to see that quite a number of Africans are actually registered on this workshop. This is one avenue where we can promote this system and make sure that a lot of people know that such a system exists, where you can just go there and type out something. And of course, this is also focused just on ocean science. So there are other search engines there, but once you go in there, you can bring out everything that you need to know about ocean science. But we can also contribute to the system. So we can also submit our best practices to the system, or we can submit our methods that can be evaluated and become endorsed as best practices. And we can utilize this system very well if we are aware of the benefits that we can derive from this ocean best practices system. Some of the key considerations for us to adopt and use it effectively are to step up the awareness creation about the OBPS, especially among early career ocean professionals through webinars like this one, and make sure that we publicize these webinars so much that we have a lot of people signing up on them, and also on workshops on how, for example, people can submit, first of all, get into the system, but also submit methodologies or best practices for use. And we have a lot of graduate students who work on various research areas, and this can be a tool that they can use in handling some of the methodologies that they need to use for their research in marine sciences. Another area that we also need to pay close attention is also developing best practices in research funding. Example, in the area of the funding plans, so how sustainable are some of these research fundings that we get. So this is how the ocean best practice system can work with or get the attention of donor communities to develop, or if they are already existing, put some of these in the system so that other people, other donor communities can also look at it and develop funding plans that truly are sustainable, but also address critical issues in the decades, such as capacity development, inclusion and diversity, and several other things. Then the system also, we also need to work with industry in developing interoperable systems, which is already undergoing, but also when it comes to things like troubleshooting, some of the basic low cost equipment that we are developing these days. If we are able to develop systems that are more interoperable, then it also helps with things like challenges like troubleshooting, which sometimes researchers in developing countries, we don't have that capacity to troubleshoot some of these basic equipment. So if the system can also incorporate some of these things as far as low cost technologies are involved, that would be great. And also in developing best practices. So one of the things that the decade seeks to also do is to promote the co-design of projects. And this means that this co-design thing is a process. And so we need to have best practices that guide the whole idea of co-designing projects. So that is one thing that we can also look at or consider. Then when it comes to capacity development and sharing also, there is so many initiatives out there that are trying to develop capacity, but also through summer schools and what have you. How can we harmonize them, standardize them so that they can be compared across board, but can also be replicated in other areas? Then finally, similar to capacity building, we also need to start thinking through ocean literacy. What best practices can we think of as far as ocean literacy and outreach is concerned? Finally, some of the benefits that I think that we as Africans and everyone can derive from this, the ocean best practices system, if we adopt it very well, is enhanced capacity in terms of the research and research methodologies, but also the skills and also personnel, and our ability to generate data that can be shared and compared across board, and having interoperable systems that we can use simultaneously, and also be able to address challenges and barriers to technology adoption. That is also one area that we can actually benefit from the ocean best practices system. And that is all I have to share today. Thank you very much for the attention.
Thanks a lot, Edem. Well, you have described quite a program for BPS, and not only for BPS, I mean, for the whole community. It's very, very interesting. And I would like to stress, Edem is quite modest, but I would like to say that Edem is a recipient of the 2022, last year, American Geophysical Union, AGU, Africa Award for Research Excellence in Ocean Science. So, kudos.
Thank you.
It's really quite an achievement. Craig, I think I let you the hand.
René, thank you very much, and good day to everyone, and thank you to the panelists. If I could give just a short reactive review to what we heard here. I'll start first with the excellent presentation by Vladimir Ryabinin as the Executive Secretariat of the IOC. The IOC really is the home to everything that we're talking about here in terms of international coordination and the journey that that body has taken from 40 member states in the very beginning to 150 member states. And as we then heard from Peter, in terms of IODE, we have an excellent system that is even further organizing global ocean data. And it's very important that we do that. From Joana's perspective, as the head of GOOS, and Joana, we're very lucky to have you bringing your resume and your experience from other parts of the UN community and UNFCCC and the like. It's a very opportune moment for us to have your leadership in GOOS. GOOS is a remarkably successful system that has developed standards. And I think one of the questions I will be asking you shortly, so I'll give you a heads up, is given that we are a voluntary organization. Peter, I will invite you to remark on the same matter here. Given that we are a voluntary organization, the ocean scientists of the world, we do not have a treaty that compels our participation or defines the observations, measurements, or collaborations we are to make. But of course, the weather world does. So with that pretext, I'm going to just ask you to stand by, and I'll launch the question of, do we need something stronger, or are best practices the best we could do now? Okay, I'm going to return to that. But then from Audrey, and Audrey, thank you for an excellent presentation. I enjoy the opportunity to learn of GEO Blue Planet's genesis of technically a new observing system. And Audrey, for you, my heads up so that we don't surprise you when the question launches, is the methodology of defining best practices going to be sufficient to build the type of observing system that you and Blue Planet and the community already engaged have in mind? And then Edem, thank you so much. And once again, congratulations, as René has offered to you, for your excellence and your achievement in the global community. In the development of much of the world, the dependence on capacity development, either domestically or with international assistance and provision of assets, do you find that the definition of best practices helps to generate the resources necessary to build what you want to build, as opposed to just asking for resources from your national governments of building an ocean observing system coastally, contributing globally, either or? Is this a leveraged help? So I've given you a heads up for what I'm going to ask you, but also in somewhat of a review of what we've heard here. I think it's stirring to see your characterization on behalf of a global community. And I think based on what I know, it's very, very accurate. Okay, so deep breath, everyone. We have about a little less than an hour to go through some questions and answers. I'm going to try and keep my eyes on the Q&A portion of the chat. I've seen one question posted already, and I believe that it is either answered or under progress for answering. But there was also a question or comment when we were discussing and learning about the Barcelona meeting, how one would register. And I'm going to have to defer to our IOC active colleagues if there's any information on that. But we'll continue to keep an eye on the chat and the Q&A. But let me now I'll go to the order that we heard from our presenters. And Peter, if you would care to answer that question that I generally pose to you. We have standards of best practice. They have been implemented. I'm really thrilled to see what the Ocean Data and Information System is doing to unite data. Are best practices really helping you get there? And is there some other bridge we would need to cross, which would be the likes of a treaty-based obligation to encourage, if not compel, the collection of ocean data, how it's stored, and how it's contributed? So Peter, over to you, and then Joana will follow.
All right. Well, I'll start with your second question, because in these we have been struggling for, I think, about 60 years with the fact that all IOC activities are basically done by our member states on a voluntary basis. And there is no legal obligation for member states to share the data they collect. So we do have a data policy. We just adopted one this year, a revised data policy and terms of use. But at the end of the day, it's the member states who decide themselves. And of course, with politics and conflicts around the world, which always exist, there's always the challenge that member states will not share. Also, in a number of cases, data systems may be completely destroyed by war or conflict. So that's a major issue. Now, how can we improve that? Well, the system I illustrated, the ODIS, the first thing it does is it agrees on basic interoperability mechanisms that are, in a way, based again on metadata structures. So we already there agree on a minimum metadata structure that is required for you to expose your data sets in your data system. So that's, in a way, an agreed upon best practice, agreed upon by everybody who joins the partnership. I also said we have to build trust. That also means that users of the data need to be certain that the data and information we share is of a certain minimum quality. So there we need to agree on these quality control methods at the technical level, again, at the level of the metadata, the provenance. There we have a number of manuals and guides, as I explained, but we now, within the framework of best practices, and there I think IOD will have to work a little bit harder within our community, we need to test whether our manuals and guides are still relevant today, if they should be considered as best practices, or are there others out there that are better? Yeah, so, and also, like I said, in terms of ontologies and vocabularies, again, we will need to take stock of what exists and what can be considered as a best practice. So there is quite a bit of work to be done, but in a way, ODIS is now also driving this, because unless we have these agreements on methodologies, quality control and whatnot, ODIS cannot work, or it cannot provide the data and information of known quality. And that ultimately, because we're talking about the value chain, we're starting with observations and research, we go through data management, and then we have some products and services. What I think is still missing a little bit in the IOC context is the linkage between that these products and services and decision-making support. Yeah, I think that is still something that is missing within the context of IOC, where we'll need to work harder. And of course, then I don't have to tell you, coming from NOAA, that if the information you're providing to the decision maker is wrong, it will explode in your face, and it can cause economic damage and other kind of damage that is difficult to repair, and you've lost your trust forever. So that is something we will have to work on very hard within the framework of ODIS, also in the framework of the decade. Okay, so I hope that answers your questions.
Very fine, Peter, thank you. And you've given me the seed for many follow-up questions. Thank you. I'll be back to you shortly. And Joana, would you like to take a swing at that one?
I can try in a very short space of time. I could take a very long swing at it too, so I'll try and be brief. I think Peter touched on it. We are working in a value chain which ultimately serves decision making, but we live in a world where we know that decision makers are quite capable of making those decisions without any science whatsoever. So I think what we need to do, and I'll give you an example from the Paris Agreement. I think the Paris Agreement was a very good example of a massive paradigm shift for science. So up until 2015, scientists were pushing for policymakers to recognize climate change. And then they did so. And the Paris Agreement is evidence of that. But what now needs to happen is that science needs to serve that agreement. And I think you have in the multilateral agreements, the SDGs, the Paris Agreement, the Global Biodiversity Framework, information at the FAO, and more recently, of course, the biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. You have the frameworks in which information and scientific information needs to be delivered into that space. The the dichotomy is that we have a GOOS, which has been identified in terms of its strategy as a bottom-up delivery of this is everything that we would really like to do about ocean observation. And we have to match that. And I think there's a lot of need to have co-designed conversations or co-produced information from the bottom up. And Edem was referring to that very, very much so in her work in Africa, about the fact that you need to bring the stakeholders together to understand where are the priorities that we need to deliver into in terms of these spaces for decision making. For example, I was recently last week at the WMO, we're talking about the Global Greenhouse Gas Watch. This is the opportunity from the observation system to deliver information around GHG fluxes predominantly, but the greater GHG cycling, carbon cycling that's needed for parties to understand what's happening in terms of the atmosphere, ocean and land, and fluxes between all those, but also to deliver information around GHG, to deliver information around carbon, to deliver eventually, hopefully, to sort of support the decision making around carbon dioxide removal as well. So there is a clear need that observation needs to pass into here, and the conversation needs to be such that we try and identify where the priorities are, understanding the bigger picture at the same time. I hope that. And actually coming back to your voluntary organization question, we have all of these agreements that are not voluntary, that parties have signed up to. At the same time, ocean observation, you're right, there's no multilateral agreement to deliver ocean observation into some sort of unified system. So there's a lot of networks been set up to try and answer this big challenge. And I don't need to repeat what we've already discussed about that. Having said that, I think if you start a multilateral process to try and to fix that, it takes, well, we saw how long the BBNJ takes, 10 years, 20 years, and so on. We haven't got time to do that. So we need to have these conversations now about, okay, how best can we coordinate the best practices, which the team are doing very well to respond to some of these needs and coordinate this context, while perhaps thinking, long term, perhaps there is the possibility to provide this. But I think GOOS provides a very good framework, and we are certainly talking about strengthening that to deliver the needs without waiting for a sort of some sort of multilateral conversation to even start, never mind to finish.
Joana, thank you very much. I appreciate you raising several of those issues. And I also want to endorse your comment about, for example, the time that it took for BBNJ. BBNJ was a ripe and ready concept at the time of the signing of the UN Convention on Law of the Sea. And it took many years in order to have that idea surfaced, developed, and basically 20 years from an active conversation to an implementation. And when we look around us in this world, we don't have 20 years in order to garner that data. So for the panelists, keep in the back of your mind, what else have you seen that might have worked? We have a great tension between exclusive economic zone or EEZ-based data, whether it is shared to complement the global data, and whether there are many nations where national security concerns, as Peter had mentioned, are causing the lack of sharing. And frankly, if you don't have all the data, you don't have a good model. So something like the digital twin is suffering compromise because of the availability of that data. So let that stir some other thoughts. And if any panelists would like to return to that, let's do so. I'm going to move now to Audrey. And Audrey, as you build your observing system, very important, a point that you made, I want to go back to as well, is that in your review, you saw how the challenge that you're addressing, we could summarily label it as just challenge number one, but it reaches them all. And I think every one of our challenges interrelate in such a way. The fact that you have such relevance to each of the other challenges, does that make it easier to build? And I'd invite any other comments you have as in starting off and initiating an observing component. And I choose that word carefully because if we don't need yet another observing system. We need a component of the global observing system. And this one will focus on pollutants and plastics. So Audrey, your thoughts, please.
Well noted for the component part. I just, if you don't mind, I want to go back to the question you asked at the very beginning,
please.
When you ask how the best practices, helped to build the IMDOS. So as I was saying before, it's really a partnership of working together with existing initiatives and so on. So we need best practices for the monitoring system, for the data management, and for this we actually work with the IODE and so on. And I think, to me, I would call it this way: that the best practices is really a Troy horse to have everyone around the table. Because if you look at data management, that enables us to have IODE around the table, NOAA, to have ModNet, to have all these groups who are already working on data management and federating this data together. And then we can steer this conversation and manage to get the best practices. So for me, it's almost a mean of getting this collaboration together. And one thing I also wanted to answer about Peter's comment earlier about the decision making, that we have the value chain in the I call it the last mile, reaching from the services, the products, the knowledge, reaching the decision maker, the people who are going to use this data. In the context of marine litter, it's quite different, because we almost start from the two ends, because you have from one side the community who realized that we needed to have a federated observing component to have this data to be able to produce the knowledge we don't have. And then on the other end, UNEA in 2021, if I remember well, came together and decided on building this global treaty agreement, and they're working on it with the negotiation committees every 6 months, and we're working with their expert panel to make sure that the data we're building will eventually and already connect to this decision making at the UNEP level. So this is another task for IMDOS, is really to make sure that we cover as much as we can the entire value chain.
Thank you, Audrey, very, very much. Edem, as we go back to your presentation and the highlights that you shared for us about the value of having best practices, I think this is the best evidence that anyone could invite as to why having this set of practices, in some cases standards, some cases voluntary standards, but I invite your remarks as to how, in building either a nation or regional or national or regional enterprise, is really enhanced by having the best practices. And do you have any advice for colleagues, as I note the participation around the world in the list of folks who have signed on to this broadcast here? Do you have any advice for folks as to how to use and leverage the existence of the best practices to build what you need for your community, regionally and nationally? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. So I'll take this based on capacity development, for example. So best practices are really good because they guide us to actually implement programs in ways that seek to achieve or maximize the results that we need. So when we take capacity development, for example, we can see that there's just so many initiatives that are happening, but we need to understand that capacity development should be problem-driven. We should clearly identify a problem in society that we want to address or want to develop capacity in. We should also understand that capacity development approaches should be different for different groups. So for example, if we are looking at policymakers, if we want to develop their capacities, we need to know that these are different groups that we are targeting. If we are looking at community level, if we are looking at sciences, we need to know that these are all different groups. And then also, we also should also understand that they should be sustainable to some extent. And for all this, for us to be able to achieve all this, we need to be able to leverage on some sort of best practices that can guide us to, make sure that we are doing the right thing the way it ought to be done, so that we are not doing things anyhow and not really attaining the results that we need to attain. So I think that, or I believe that if we have a system that, or a best practice system that guide us in the way we approach capacity development, it can help a lot. For example, if we are even talking about ocean observing systems, for example, in some areas, you need to ask certain questions, and this can be guided by best practices. For example, do this community, do they need discrete systems or they need autonomous systems? How are they going to be able to maintain all this? If they go for autonomous system, how would they be able to maintain, troubleshoot, and all that? So if we have that step by step, or that the best practices that guide us in some of this work, then we can avoid some of the challenges that do not make these programs as effective as we want them to be. Thank you.
Edem, thank you very much. Maybe just one quick follow-up for you. As a community, a regional community, maybe developing capacity, one has to ask for resources to their national government or other sponsors. And I would easily understand how having best practices makes it really easy to define what you need. Are there areas that you see in, for example, the Pan-Africa community that doesn't yet have best practices developed, that an area would be assisted by defining such? A subject matter area, sorry, not geographic area, but a subject matter area.
Yes, so I think that there are some areas that we need to develop best practices in. So, for example, like I said, in the research uptake process, for example, the linking research and industry, we don't have best practices. We do have in some areas, but not globally. So this is definitely an area that if we want to put research into use, then we need to look at best practices that can help facilitate this. And then when it comes to implementation of some large programs, for example, collaborations between maybe global north and the global north and global south, there are obviously best practices that we need to go by. So these are some of the areas that we can look at, but there are several areas that we need to actually look into developing best practices for.
Edem, thank you. I think the magic key is defining that industry collaborative relationship, and in at least my purview, I'm not sure that I've seen one model that actually works. There are so many exigencies to this. I see that Peter has raised his hand during the course of this topic exchange. Peter, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna use first of all an example. I mean, coming back to the issue of not willing to share data or not even collecting data. I think we have a very good example within IOC where things all of a sudden went very quickly. That's the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami. There was no tsunami warning system in the Indian Ocean. Before that tsunami, certain countries were totally unwilling to share any data from within their EEZ. But after the tsunami, when there was clearly a demand from society to do something about this so it wouldn't happen again, all of a sudden, a lot of those barriers were knocked down. Data were being collected and shared relevant to tsunami. Also in terms of methodologies, observation systems, all of a sudden there was money and it was possible. And those systems are still running today. So the lesson I take from that is, if you can identify a clear society relevant problem, issue that needs to be solved and that is manageable, then the resources become available. In terms of observation and best practices, I think one of the tasks of the OBPS is also a certain method may be applicable in one geographic region, but not in another. Measuring certain parameters in a tropical environment or in a cold water environment is different. But also, as OBPS can help identifying low-cost methodology, low-cost sensors or disposable sensors that can be purchased by the less affluent countries. Yeah, and those have to be tested to see if they provide the necessary quality data. But I think that's part of OBPS, because not everything needs to be done with instrumentation that costs $1 million. Yeah, because that will never be achieved by the Global South. But if you can identify low-cost sensors, then you can make it work. So I think that's also, so on one hand, identifying these society relevant issues, and those you can discuss with the policymakers and say, listen, you know that this is a problem. We with our national institutions can help, because also what often we see is parachuting, where governments actually hire foreign consulting companies to solve their problems, while the scientists within the countries get nothing to do and get no resources. So that's also something we need to find a way, and maybe the decade can help with that, if we can reach the higher levels of government to assist with that. Okay, I can come off my soapbox now.
Peter, I'll build a new deck for your soapbox. I think it's very important that you raise the parachuting issue. And I think in any of the presentations I've seen from countries that, as you've described, perhaps might be less affluent or less endowed with some of the methodologies, et cetera, the greatest success is where parachuting is avoided, and where an investment in the education of the nationals or the residents of the community are enhanced, so that the talent is grown and stays in those communities. So I appreciate you raising that. And I think avoiding parachuting is a best practice. Just a worthy note here, friends, that the webinar chat and then also the Q&A function on this platform have some very active exchanges going on. They are not separate and apart from the conversations we're having, but I just invite you to utilize these facilities. And I want to thank our panelists who have been very attentive to be addressing the questions as they have been presented. So if I go now, Joanna, I'm going to jump to you. And recognize in the course of your presentation, you very appropriately identified the methods and tools that are involved in observing systems, rather than what could be described as the number of observing systems that we have. And I'll recall a presentation by a colleague of yours who is in the GOOS IOC system, who referenced something on the order of 110 or 112 separate observing systems in the scientific literature. And my affirmation would be that that's probably 109 or 110 too many. We need an observing system, and we need these attributes to be added to it. But the challenge I think that many nations have is that in order to get the next step of advancement, I need to come up with a new name, a new title, a new ball cap, a new t-shirt that advertises my version of an observing system. So here you have in your hands the global ocean observing system of many methodologies and components. Do you have advice? Do you have a best practice for how any nation or any individual or group of scientists could go ahead and generate a new idea and add it to that global ocean observing system?
Challenging questions, Craig. I think the important thing to remember is that don't create something new. Work with what systems there are and bring that to the same table. I'm a little bit not certain what system you're referring to. I mean, the thing is that there are certain ways that we can measure the ocean through buoys, through ships, through satellites, and so on. Forgive me, my cat has decided to take part in the call as well. So I think additional information within that system is, of course, extremely important, but it needs to come into the system, not be created out of it. Having said that, there are new types of network that are being developed. Underwater cables, for example, there's a very strong movement to use subsea cables as a not just for their telecommunications capacity, but to add sensors onto that. There are, of course, questions in terms of stability, longevity within those, but that would also be something. So in some ways, we work with observation networks of different instruments rather than systems. So I know you're asking me to reflect. I know you know all of the answers probably already to that one, but I think one of the challenges though with the ocean is, of course, a lot of the countries, and the UN is a party-driven process, so countries decide what they want to do within their national context and within their national borders, and that goes up until the end of their EEZs. As far as the biggest power in terms of that is Doualos and the law of the sea. So the challenges for the ocean are also that, the observations has to be a group effort because it goes beyond national borders. And so I see GOOS as the hub, if you like, where we can have these conversations. So what I would say, to sort of a short answer to that, having waffled a bit, is that come to us first. And let's make sure that you are part of the solution space, working with our best practices, working with our data colleagues to make sure that everything we're working with one blue planet and one global ocean observing system. And within that context, then we work out the sort of federal aspects of that to serve the needs of the countries.
Joana, thanks. I think you got right to where I was hoping you could target and share those thoughts, that GOOS is that coordinating body, and it has existed in such a way. And it's not a reference to each individual titled observing system. It's a reference to the many different types of ship cruises, the many different types of moored or mobile and autonomous systems. So it's that level of coordination and where to go when one wants to bring a new idea or a new concept. So thank you very much for that. And then, of course, with the coordination under GOOS with 150 nations seated at the IOC, then we have an easy conduit to get into the repository of those data, which is where Peter and IODE and the collective community stand. So I think we have a good construction on the build it, develop it, apply it, and then deliver it. So since we're building and since we're developing, Audrey, I'll jump back to you and request any advice that you have in the experience that you have taken with GEO in developing a new cadre of observations. Perhaps they have yet to be completely defined, but that new cadre of observations as you're starting out, how have you used and approached the definition of best practices elsewhere as you endeavor to establish those of your own for pollution and plastics and the likes?
I'm not sure I understood your question. What do you mean by other best practices? I'm sorry.
The methodology of using best practices is an opportunity for you to find models or a model that has worked for others before. So as you set out to build what you're building, are there areas of existing best practices that you have looked to say, gosh, I think if we follow that pathway or these pathways, we will do very well? If you care to, could you explain any experience that you've had there?
Yes, of course. So as I was saying, we do not plan on reinventing anything. And as you're saying, we're doing an observing system that is a component to GOOS. And there are always already some other components. So we are looking at the expertise we're working with the people from the Global Carbon Observing Network, for instance, who have expertise into building a network that is, efficient and that works and so on. We're also looking, when it comes to the link with policymakers, we're looking at other topics where we are, like sargassum, for instance, working directly with the IOC Caribbean and other regional seas conventions from UNEPs and so on. So I think it's a little bit of a mix and match from, you know, where we get our expertise, but putting everything together will and already is making IMDOS strong, because it's kind of like it's rolling the ball, right? It's like a, you know, like a snowball that we're pushing. We started really small, but then all of a sudden we're like growing and growing, and I think we started the movement, and now it's gonna get finally in, you know, enough motion that we can build that component, and we're really excited to have more and more people joining us with their own expertise. We are working with the Ministry of Environment of Japan, for instance, and they do have a lot of expertise in putting people around the table to do this, and of course, as I was saying, IMDOS and NOAA and other groups in Australia and Oliver. So it's really exciting, and we're learning a lot as well as we go.
Thank you, Audrey. Very well. I'm sorry that I didn't phrase my question so succinctly on the front end, but you've answered it quite well, and I hope that
Perfect.
The rest of our participants can appreciate that as well. Edem, as you look about and recognize the needs of Africa, as you have been recognized by AGU, American Geophysical Union, and the likes, are there suggestions that you have that others can pay attention to that has worked for you, by referring to the best practices, by using these tools that have been made available by the various communities that we're listening to here? I look at the attendance list on this, you know, on this broadcast, and there are many people from many countries that have needs similar to what you have experienced, and where you may have found benefit could be very instructional and advantageous to them. So is there anything you would like to share about how the existence of this suite of best practices has benefited your journey? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, so I have used the best practices, or the suite of best practices that exists to some extent. So one project that we recently carried out in Africa, which is the COLLECT project, the citizen observation of litter in ocean coastal ecosystems. This is a project that worked with about 7 schools in Africa and also 1 school in Malaysia. I think Eileen is here. Eileen was a partner on that project as well. And the goal of this project was to develop a citizen science activity for high school students in West Africa to, first of all, increase their awareness on the issue of plastic and microplastic pollution, but also help in generating data in areas that lack data as far as this research is concerned. And because we wanted to generate data that can be used globally, we needed to conform to or use existing best practices. And so we used resources such as the UNEP Marine Litter observation guidelines, together with other best practices, best practice of methodologies that exist for microplastic work, to develop our own manual or sort of working document that we used in training and engaging these schools. So that is one way that I have used that the systems that exist. And then our recent project, which is looking at using mangroves as nature-based solutions to coastal hazards in Ghana. For that project, we needed to develop an extensive co-design component of that project. So the first phase, the first 9 months of that project was purely a co-design process with national to community level stakeholders. And for that, we had to look at existing standards that exist for co-designing research work. And so these are some of the ways that I have benefited from these existing methodologies that are there, and I promote it among my colleagues to take advantage and use them when it comes to supervising our graduate students. We've had challenges where students are torn on which methodologies to use for their student research work because they are not aware of some of these existing methodologies that are there. So we can also promote these best practices that exist among our graduate students and other early career ocean professionals. Thank you.
You're muted, Craig. Craig, you're muted.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I had a phone ringing in my background and I didn't want you to be distracted by that. I apologize. But Edem, thank you very much for that answer. And I think what you have provided can be informative and an inspiration for many of the participants in this workshop. Because as I note, and as I commend to our organizers, the level of participation that we have here from the communities that would benefit most from an awareness of best practices and these methodologies are very much attending this meeting. So I want to thank the organizers for doing so. Peter, if I could jump back to you very quickly, and then I'll ask others to join in on this one question. Peter, you mentioned that there are, I think, 75 manuals that IODE has produced over the years, and you're very dutifully and responsibly looking at what we have defined so far may have been updated by new methods, technologies, et cetera. So there was a review. So I'd invite comments from each of the panelists on what we have 5 minutes remaining. Where do we go with best practices? We can create some anew. We can evaluate the existing ones to see if they need to be updated. Is this something that an individual PI should be communicating with IODE or GOOS, or is this something that should be channeled up through the various meetings of these institutions? And how does an individual get in touch with influencing the best practices? Okay, very good.
Yeah. So in my presentation, I indicated the IOD proposal to go to this federated approach, because now OBPS is basically attempting to cover everything. Yeah, and that is, of course, a problem if you start scaling into domains where the steering group, which is the current body that looks at the different practices, doesn't have expertise. So what we could imagine is that for data management related practices, it would be IOD that actively looks for practices developed by a number of, let's say, large scale data management activities. I mentioned some of them: CDataNet, MODNet, AODN in Australia, in the US similarly. Yeah, and then see, okay, which practices do you have within the domains that we need, within the topical areas that we manage, and come up with a practice that we could agree on would be best practice. But of course, overall, the OBPS will have to provide a bit of a template for what is it that you need to consider when you're reviewing a practice to elevate it to a best practice. Yeah, that is something that needs to, and then for GOOS, for ocean observing, you could do the same. You could even split it into sub-communities because some of them are very specialized. But so you have this federated approach, and each of these communities will actively go and look for what practices exist, how do they relate to what we already have, and how can we elevate some of these to what we could consider best practice. But also taking into account what I said earlier, that there may be, the best practices may be for a particular environment, a particular region. Yeah, tropical, Atlantic, Southern Ocean, and whatnot. So I think that is something that each, let's say, substance community will have to work on, but with general methodologies that are across those disciplines, across those communities, and bearing in mind the needs of the Global South and the capabilities of the Global South.
Thank you, Peter, very much. I'm noting the time, and I see that our host René had a hand up. So René, can I invite your intervention at this point?
Yeah, it's a point that has been addressed by all of the panelists, but which again, either directly or implicitly, it's the word integration. We have many communities in ocean science, let's say, and talking or not talking together, and putting together their expertise is very difficult. I mean, I don't want to name any, but the satellite community and the in-situ community for years, we have been talking about integration, okay? And integration seems now to, when you apply for a project, which I did, seems to be a weakness instead of a force, like, because I was talking about satellite observation, radar observation for plastic, in situ drifting buoys, models, currents seen by satellite and so on. And the answer was, well, that's completely different. And you cannot put that together. And aim was to put that together. So, and part of the ocean science, we have also the technology, marine and science technology community. And we were talking about low-cost sensors, and or what we do at IEEE, we're working on smart sensors. That is, instead of having thousands of sensors, you have a given number which is smaller, but smart. And I am not talking about artificial intelligence, but this patch, so that you get the information that you need without having to go everywhere to see it. So that is, I think, one of the weaknesses, that all these communities talking about best practices, they should at one point stress that the best practice is to put together some best practices, exactly what Peter was mentioning and was talking about. And okay, that's just a remark, and I have no solution so far, but I'd like all these different worlds, you know, to talk together, even though they are not talking the same language.
René, you highlight a very important point here. And while we have, in looking at the level of attendance and where folks are coming from, we have largely the people who will benefit from the use of these best practices. The problem you cite, where integration is not uniformly embraced by the sponsors of research, where an application for research money is met with that type of reaction. I wish those people were part of this workshop so that they could hear and see the importance of this integration. But that's a lot of work that we all have to do in order to advance that. I'm noting the time, and I see that we're at the conclusion of our time, and I certainly want to be respectful. Peter, if you forgive me, I think your last answer was a good summation of your values. Can I ask Joana and then Audrey and Edem, if you would care to offer just one closing remark that it captures what you hope to convey here best. So Joana, to you, please.
I would just say that use GOOS as the hub for a global ocean observing system, and we are working to deliver the information to serve the right places, understanding that underneath there's a complicated system that has a lot of very engaged people working on it, and a lot of opportunity to strengthen and sustain moving forward, providing that we have recognition and deliver the advocacy that's what is needed to build this. It's not a value chain. I think it's a value exchange up and down. Thank you.
Thank you, Joana. Audrey.
You're muted. You're muted.
Thanks, sorry. At the end. I just wanted to say that the Ocean Best Practices is not only a tool for us to, provide best practices on how to do all this observing and then the management and so on, but I think it's also a mean, as I was saying, to have around the table people working towards the same goal. And we are really happy to use it, in these both two ways. Thank you.
Thank you, Audrey. Edem.
Yes, I would like to say that the Ocean Best Practices system should be really adopted by all of us, especially for my colleagues from the Global South. We need to use it. If it is only when we use it that we can identify gaps in areas where we think that we should have other new best practices. And so my advice to all of us is that let's go into the system, register, let's use it, and come out or look at where the gaps are so that we can also contribute to putting in some standards that can maybe in the future be upgraded to best practices there. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I think we've done a rather admirable job to convey a lot of information in the time that we have had here. But I want to thank each of our panelists very much for your thoughtful answers and your excellent presentations, and to invite everyone who is attending to really understand the value of what you've heard here. And you should be able to go back and review this broadcast at some point in the future as well. But to that end, I want to thank René for giving me the opportunity to join you here, George as well, and also Jose, always an amazing supporter of all things oceans from out at the Air Center, and very quietly, but always in the background, making things happen, Jay Perlman. And Jay, thank you as well for your kindness. So René, I return the floor to you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. I mean, it's the same. I would like to congratulate all the panelists and the presenter, and also, of course, everyone in the background, and especially I was looking at the Q&A, and Peter did a fantastic job of replying to everyone. That's something that is amazing. I hope that, Jose, you can confirm to me that because it is recorded, that we can have access later on to not only to the discussion on the chat in French, and also to the Q&A and the reply to the Q&A. I think it's embedded. I'm not so sure, but because the answers were to the Q&A were very informative. The questions were sometimes very difficult to answer because, you know, like in my part of the world, I want that, and wow, and Peter had the answer. So thanks, Peter, and thanks to you all, and great continuation of the day, whatever the time is where you are. Thanks.